This is Gary Parr. You're listening to Fiber Talk, and I'm here with Nicola Parkman, Hands Across the Sea Samplers, and guess what we're going to talk about?
Hello everybody. We're going to talk about Bristol Orphan Samplers and Harriett Salt.
Now this is one of your two new releases here.
It is, yes. Harriett Salt is a very special sampler. The fact that a little orphan girl stitched a sampler, and this sampler acted as her resume when she applied for a position when she was 18 years of age.
Okay.
And most of the girls at the Bristol Orphanage would have gone into domestic service, and this sampler could have determined their position they had in domestic service. Harriet was a very good needleworker, and she gained a position as a personal attendant to a lady. So she was a lady's maid come secretary.
Okay, now, all right, now we'll back up the truck here.
Okay.
All right, help me. When you say to a lady, that means someone of...
I don't mean a lady as in an aristocrat. It
Okay.
was a lady of middle and upper class. It was a Miss Cooper who ran a young ladies' boarding school in Malvern.
Okay.
And
So, but by lady, we have someone of some stature in society.
Yes.
To some degree. Yeah.
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. Somebody who had some money that could afford to have servants and was running a boarding school for young ladies where wealthy merchants, professional people would have sent their daughters to be taught good manners.
Okay.
And a smattering of education, because girls didn't necessarily have a
Right.
very good education, academic education. Girls then were being sent away to learn social skills and maybe to mix with people who had money to make connections.
Okay. That old marry into money kind of thing.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Old world type, yeah, which
That's
still
right.
hangs around today probably.
Yes.
Okay, now we're fortunate here in that we get to see the reproduction, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but this is the original now. And that's the fun part for me, is when we can have the two in the same
That's
room.
right.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And you can see how small
Yeah.
the original
Well, here, let me
sample
back up
is.
just so people can see the proportion.
So if we just put this against the model was stitched on 56 count linen, which is a high count linen, and you can see how much larger than the original it is. If you pull back, and you can actually see the difference in size.
That's got to be almost 80 or 90 count.
It's 80 count.
80?
Yes. After talking to Claudia Dutcher-Kitzler, who is the expert on Bristol Orphanage samplers, we believe that this may well have been stitched on the remnants of a bed sheet.
A bed sheet.
Yes. At the orphanage, what they had was donated, and people would donate bed sheets that were no longer fit for their beds, and the girls would have darned them and used them in the orphanage beds, and eventually when they got so tattered that they couldn't be used for bed sheets anymore, they would have been cut up, and segments that were good for stitching would have been given to the girls to stitch their samplers on. And with the Bristol Orphanage samplers, you see them stitched on all types of fabrics, linen, cotton handkerchiefs, and Claudia was telling me that she's even seen them stitched on fine gauze as well. It really depended what was there. Nothing was wasted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you have nothing and you have no government funding, everything you have has to be through charitable donations. You don't waste anything.
Right.
It's,
The thought of stitching on 80 count in that time, young eyes aside, with no magnification,
Yes.
that's impressive work.
It is impressive work, isn't it?
And then now, so we have how many alphabets up here?
I haven't
20?
counted them. I haven't counted them at all. There's all
Well,
different...
let's take some time and count them. No, I
Oh gosh, right, okay.
no. So, and
But
then
I tell you what is interesting.
Okay.
And maybe we might see this a little bit better on the model because it's larger.
Right.
So if I just,
So let's do that. Yeah.
if I just put the antique back and pull the model forward, we have here some odd numbers. So we have B951, we have treble 12.1065, we have 941. If you come down here, there's a whole series of odd numbers. And talking to Claudia, she thinks that these numbers, the 3-digit numbers, could be bed numbers.
Oh.
Okay, bed numbers of the orphans. So she could have had a friend who was in bed 459. Bed 459 might have been her bed. The beds were all numbered. And the 4-digit numbers were probably orphan numbers. Like we know that Harriet was orphan 1628. That was her number.
Oh, okay.
And her middle sister was 1629, and her baby sister was 1630. The orphans were all numbered as they went into the
So
orphanage.
these could be acknowledgement of friends.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, there's another one there, 966.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't know, do you?
That's fun.
You do not know.
But that's part of the fun history.
Of course,
is
yes.
you get a little peek into the lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, we even have Roman numerals. She did the whole thing here.
That's right.
And then we get down into the Bible and then some designs.
Yes, and she made a mistake here with her Roman numerals. She got them right here, but she did 1, 2, 3, 6, 5, 4.
Yep.
And that's a new Roman numeral.
Yeah. Never before used since.
No. So, yeah. And
But see, those little things like that make me wonder if it's just kids being kids.
doesn't it just add to the charm?
Yeah,
It really,
yeah.
really does. And because I'm dyslexic, I really had to treble check I wasn't seeing it incorrectly on the original, but you can look on the original and it is like that. The one thing that I really love about Bristol Orphanage samplers, they give so much back to the stitcher. If you sat down in an evening and you were going to stitch on this area, that is something that's very achievable in one stitching session. So every time you sit down with your needle and Harriet, you feel as if you achieve something. And I think that's, they give an awful lot. And most cross stitchers, needle workers, they like brain games, brain puzzles.
Sure.
We like to use our brains to solve things. And I always love sitting down and thinking, now, how am I going to work this motif? What order am I going to take the stitches in? So I find each little band quite easy to stitch because they are just cross stitches over 2, but there is a mental challenge working out the best stitch path to take.
But yeah, you can see a stitching session in every single one of those.
That's right. So every night you sit down, an hour or 2, and you've achieved a section.
Right, right.
Which is great fun. And these are all border patterns, really. There's so, I think, oh gosh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
And then I think, oh, look at that one. Look at that one. Look at that one. And I'm like this all the time, looking at them. And the more you look, the more you see. And these border patterns are getting smaller as she's working down, but they are all cross-stitch over 2.
But now, here a classic example of the functionality of these samplers.
Yes, well, the
reference resource pieces.
The alphabets they would have used to mark household linen.
Right.
And the border patterns would have been maybe for tablecloths, handkerchiefs as edgings. Very, very pretty. I have a soft spot for orphanage samplers.
Now, hard to come by the samplers from this orphanage?
Well, a lot of them were stitched, but they are very valuable. They are highly sought after by collectors, and there's always, a fierce bidding battle when these come up for auction. They do command quite serious money. But some of them you'd think, gosh, I really, really want this one. And Harriet screamed at me when I saw her, and I'm very grateful that my husband, once again, my wonderful husband,
Go, Ray, go.
Yeah, absolutely. He understands what needlework means to me.
Ray, hang in there, Ray.
That's right.
Now, who stitched this? Did you stitch this? This one you did.
This one. And this is my very first piece on 56 count linen. And I wanted to stitch it on the highest count that I could, because I wanted it as close to the original on 80 count. And I have to admit, when the fabric arrived, I thought, oh my God, I'm never ever going to be able to see this. So I got my magnifier and I put about 3 or 4 stitches, not on the sample, I just did it in the margin.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I thought, yes, I can do this. And I put my magnifier away, and just with my extra strong readers, I started to stitch. And all I needed to do was to get a few cross stitches in to gauge the size. And as I was stitching along, the holes got bigger and bigger. And a very dear friend of mine has started Harriet, and she is stitching her on 56 count as well, her first time on 56 count, and she rang me up and she said, this is magical linen. Every time I sit down, these holes are getting bigger and bigger.
Well, I think that's an interesting experience, because people are often hesitant to go to higher counts. And then I've often wondered because I see people do it without a major magnifier.
Yes.
And I've wondered if your eye adjusts and so it sounds like it does, it adjusts and you start to see the holes.
That's right. Everybody should stitch on what they're comfortable to stitch on. And needlework stitched on 28 count or on 56 count, they're equally as beautiful. But I wanted to challenge myself on 56 count. I wanted to push myself a little bit, and I'm very, very glad I did. And I also thought that Harriet was a good one because it was only one colour and it was only cross stitch over 2, with the exception of this alphabet, which is 4-sided stitch. That's the only different stitch right the way through. And I'm so pleased that I tried.
Yeah.
If you don't try, you don't know.
Right. I wish the camera would show the color of the linen. Do you recall what the linen is you chose for this?
It's 56 count, and it's Kingston Swigart, and it was a one-off dye lot.
Oh, okay.
So it's not really available for people to purchase.
What do you recommend on this one?
It very, very much depends on what you wish to stitch it on.
The camera just will. If I hold it here, you can get a sense of the color of the linen that Nicola used.
A good trick, if you're trying to get the colour to show as true as possible on camera, is to get a piece of white paper and hold it against it, and it will grab the colour much truer. But we don't have any white paper here.
Actually what I'm doing. By splitting the frame with the white wall behind, it's making it behave.
Yes, it is.
And what silk did you use for the thread?
I stitched this with 103, the Auvera Soie, and it was a beautiful silk to use. And I'm very pleased with the effect that it created. And this would have been the shade of red the samplers would originally have been stitched in. Because the orphanage samplers were stitched in the cheapest of the cheap red cotton, they do fade very badly, but there are enough examples that have not been in the daylight that we know that it's this lovely school red.
Yeah.
This is the sort of red your teacher in England would have marked your work with. Nicola, you must try harder.
Well, this is just beautiful. Yep.
Yeah.
So that Harriett Salt and 1628.
No, 1866. 1628 was her orphan.
Well, that was her number,
number,
her orphan number.
And Harriet has been very interesting because we know, or we believe, that Harriet stitched a second Bristol Orphanage sampler.
Oh?
Yes. Now, some people would have already heard me talk about this, But would you like me to talk about
Sure.
this again?
Yeah.
Claudia Dutcher-Kitzler, who is the leading expert on Bristol Orphanage samplers, when she heard that I had a new Bristol Orphanage sampler, she contacted me and I was telling her about the one I got. And then the next thing I knew, she said, I think she has stitched another sampler. So Claudia very kindly wrote a section of Harriet's booklet. And would you like me to read what she has to say? Every girl who lived at George Muller's orphanage between the ages of 12 to 15 was required to stitch a red thread sampler. These intricate samplers were their resume with a needle. There were hundreds of these samplers stitched. Not all have survived, but we have enough of those that did survive to know the alphabets, motifs and other characteristics that define a red Bristol sampler. Harriet's sampler presented in this booklet was the sampler that she had to stitch. Unique also to the Bristol orphan homes and much less familiar are the multicoloured samplers stitched there. These samplers are far fewer in number than the red work samplers. In the process of researching the 1866 red Harriet sampler, it was discovered that a multicoloured sampler was sold at auction in 2015 in Florence, Italy, that was stitched by Harriett Salt. There was only one Harriett Salt listed in the orphan records from 1866 to 1868. From the auction pictures, the name and information on this sampler reads Harriett Salt, North Wing, New Orphan House, Ashley Downs, Bristol, 1868. If this is Harriet's second sampler, then we now know a little bit more about the purpose of the rare multicoloured orphan samplers and why there are so few of them seen today. Harriett Salt's skill with a needle has opened the door to the idea that the multicoloured Bristol samplers could be second samplers. Most of the Bristol multicoloured samplers are not signed or dated, which makes sense if the girls were working them for their own pleasure. These samplers also share similar elements, just as the redwork pieces do. Here are several reasons why only certain girls would have been offered the chance to stitch a second sampler. Firstly, the multicoloured samplers were worked in expensive silk thread. A beginner would not have been allowed to stitch with silk. Secondly, the girl would have had to have been at the orphanage long enough to complete her redwork sampler first and then begin another sampler. Thirdly, she would have had to have purposefully set aside dedicated stitching time apart from her daily duties at the orphanage, which included taking care of the younger children, laundry and housekeeping. Therefore, the girl would have had to enjoy working with her needle and thread and wanted to stitch a second sampler. Harriet's 1868 sampler is the earliest dated and signed multicoloured Bristol sampler that has surfaced so far. Harriett Salt, because of the samplers she stitched, has provided us with an unexpected insight into sampler history. If anybody would like to find out more about Bristol Orphan samplers, Claudia has a wonderful resource website that has gathered together a lot of information about Bristol samplers, and the website address is very simple, one word, bristolsamplers.com, and it's well worth a visit to find out more about them. And I also think the fact that Harriet got a position as a personal attendant probably ties in with the fact that she was chosen to stitch a second sampler because her needlework skills would have been above average.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roman numerals aside.
Yes. Maybe she was dyslexic like I am.
Or she was just messing around. Oh, that's very nice. All right, Nicola, thank you.
You are so welcome, Gary.
All right.